The baby had just fallen asleep, and the home was at last peaceful. So it began like any other Thursday. I intended to enjoy that special moment by cleaning up the sink and doing a ton of dishes. However, the doorbell rang. If it had been something so insignificant, my initial impression was that it might be a delivery or one of those door-to-door salespeople. Instead, a man who appeared to have stepped off the cover of a lifestyle magazine in a sharp suit greeted me as I opened the door. He leaned nonchalantly against the doorframe as though he belonged there, wearing a nice watch and a smirk that made me shudder. He inquired, as though he already knew the answer. "Are you Ryan?" "Who's asking?" I said, not trying to disguise my annoyance. I wasn't feeling like playing whatever game this guy was playing, let alone when I introduced myself. He spoke fluidly, as if he were making a business presentation. "I'm Evan Carter, your wife's lover." And I froze, tightening my hold on the door. Then I concluded that I must have misheard the words because they didn't register at first. But then, as if to reveal a secret, he came closer and lowered his voice, saying, "She's carrying my child." He spoke in a confident tone, adding that she had been using your money to pay for my opulent condo. For a minute, I felt as though the world had stopped talking and thinking because of money. Skewed on its axis, I lacked a smart retort to challenge the ridiculousness of. Instead, I just stared at him, trying to understand what he was saying. He used my silence as permission to continue, saying, "Look, man, I thought you deserved to know. She has been telling me about your supposedly ideal marriage, but it's obviously not that great, isn't it?" That fucking grin gave the impression that he was relishing every moment of it, as though dropping this gave him a rush. I managed to say, "Bombshell on me, you're lying," even though my voice sounded weaker than I had planned. He shrugged and took out his phone, saying, "I have proof if you need it. Photos, texts, anything you want." He had been quite liberal with the details. I didn't need to glance at the phone, and his casual arrogance in his speech was unnecessary. Even though his tone made it clear that he wasn't bluffing, I was still unable to fully comprehend. I questioned, my voice rougher now. "Why are you here?" Evan said, "I figured you deserved to know the truth about what's been happening, and who knows, maybe this may save you time and energy by removing the need to squander it on a lady." I wanted to slam the door in his face because he obviously doesn't respect you. I wanted to remove that arrogant look from his face with a single blow, but above all, I desired to awaken and understand that this was all a twisted nightmare upstairs. I looked as the baby made a gentle sound in his crib that briefly grounded me. Whatever this man's intentions, I wasn't going to allow him to walk toward the stairs since my protective instincts were taking over. "I believe you've said enough," so I said, taking a step back and gripping the door's edge. Evan laughed, obviously having fun. "Fit yourself, Ryan, but if you ever want the complete narrative, you know where to look for me." And he turned to leave. As the door clicked, I stood there clutching the frame as if it were the only thing holding me up. Recently, I had a violent outburst of rage that had me shake my wife's lover. The ridiculousness of it all, money, pregnancy, was overwhelming. Yet behind the shock, a chilly, focused rage started to develop. This was by no means the end. Long after Evan left, the nerve of him arriving at my house grinning as like he owned it, or worse, as though he dominated my life, I immediately wanted to go after him and pull him back by the collar and force him to retract what he said. But I chose to take a deep breath and shut the door because I couldn't possibly give that man the gratification of witnessing me lose my composure. Dylan was still asleep, but the house was quiet once again, save for the faint sound of the crib upstairs. I briefly envied him since I was blissfully oblivious of the tempest that was building downstairs. Dylan's little chuckle as he took his first steps made me wonder how my wife could possibly risk ruining everything. She didn't consider the bedtime stories we read together to be sacred, but I couldn't let those thoughts consume me. I needed clarity now, not feeling. So I went to the kitchen and got a glass of water and rested against the counter. My mind painfully reenacted the exchange at the door, breaking it down in minute detail. Evan was telling the truth in everything he said, and in every arrogant look he gave me. Was this reality? Or was this some cunning and nasty hoax that I thought about phoning her right? Calling her number and requesting answers right away, but what would it achieve if she was guilty? She denied. If she wasn't, I would appear foolish for putting my faith in a stranger instead of my wife. I needed evidence, not just words, so I took the logical course of action. To do in my place, I began by stopping her phone, which she always kept. When she departed for work, I took it up from the kitchen counter and felt as though it was Pandora's box. Unlocking the box was simple because her passcode hadn't changed in years. The messages were extremely clean, with no suspicious threads or texts from Evan. I expected to find something that would support his assertions, but I knew better than to believe it because the pictures there conveyed a different message. These pictures showed her and Evan at a dinner table with wine glasses between them, their faces too close together. The kicker is that they were on a balcony with a sunset in the background. I placed a fuzzy picture of them in what appeared to be an opulent condo, with her laughing and his arm around her waist. The phone was making my stomach turn, so I went to her laptop, which she hardly ever used. It was on, indicating that she most likely hadn't considered hiding her traces there. In fact, the browser history revealed searching for opulent condos close to downtown, prenatal yoga programs, and please help me figure out how to be honest with your husband about your affair. The insolence and boldness to plot her next move while continuing to act as though nothing was wrong was the affair that hurt. She was all right at home, but I maintained my composure by not shouting or pounding, walls that wouldn't resolve anything. Instead, I continued to piece together each and every falsehood, betrayal. After that, I accessed our joint accounts on my phone to view financial details. I was going through transactions and didn't see any high-end restaurants, boutiques, or rent payments. However, there were a series of payments to a company I had never heard of, which culminated in one obvious fact. Evan hadn't been lying, and she had been funneling the condo's timetable. It was late afternoon when I stopped lying, and Dylan had already woken up and was peacefully playing with his blocks on the floor of the living room, oblivious to the mayhem his father was causing. Only I sat on the couch a few feet away, observing him with a strange sort of detachment. I felt a wave of calm, not the tranquil sort, but the kind that comes before a storm, where every action becomes intentional and every detail becomes crisp. I knew one thing for sure. I'm positive Evan Carter came here with the intention of rattling me and shattering me. I would have lashed out and crumbled beneath the weight of his revelations, but I decided to play this instead. Astute, I would compile all supporting documentation and all lies, and when the time came, I would destroy the whole web of deceit she had constructed around me because she wanted to play games, but I wouldn't just confront her. However, by the time she entered the room that night, she had misjudged the guy she married. I had changed into a man I didn't recognize, one with a clear sense of purpose where the confusion I had before felt had vanished. I believed I knew my wife better than anyone, yet she had betrayed me by settling into something cold and calculating. She had hurt me in ways I could hardly understand, but I wouldn't let her see the flaws tonight. She said, "Hey, love." Leaning in for the customary kiss, she dropped her purse on the counter. I allowed her to peck my cheek, resisting the need to recoil. The tension was broken by Dylan's laughing, which came from the living room and served as a harsh reminder of the life we constructed, or the appearance of a long day. I inquired in a steady, almost informal voice, and she nodded as she moaned and rubbed her temples, saying that her clients were a nightmare. Observing her intently, I heard the sound of harsh whine. She turned at me, shocked to see that it was sweet. "Are you certain?" I carefully poured her a drink, and as she sipped, I examined her easygoing demeanor and the way she grinned while inquiring about Dylan's day. On that day, her ability to play the "I told you" down. "Oh, I'm leaving." But don't believe for a moment that this is finished. As we walked, I wanted to play games with my life. Congratulations, you've lost. I had a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't experienced in days when I returned to the elevator. It wasn't over by any means, but Evan Carter had won this battle. He had entered my life with the belief that he could take anything he desired, but now he was the one bearing the consequences. And I wasn't finished. However, by no means was the fallout from that interaction with Evan Carter gratifying, but it was just the start. Dealing with him was one thing. Considering my wife and the mess she made, I also needed to be sure that if I wanted a fresh start, after all of this, legally and monetarily, every last detail was wrapped up, and I wasn't just defending myself, I was safeguarding Dylan's future. The day after serving Evan, I saw Mark in his office to discuss. He had been diligently investigating all of my wife's financial transactions over the previous few years, and what he discovered was worse than I had anticipated. Mark started laying, which was worse than I had anticipated, showing a pile of papers on his desk. These transactions demonstrate that Evan was paid hundreds of dollars over several months, in addition to lavish vacations, shopping trips, and personal costs that she never revealed to you? I was feeling a mixture of anger and betrayal as I looked at the documents. "What are we discussing here?" Mark tapped a figure on a piece of paper. "Near $200,000. This is fraud, Ryan, not just infidelity. She has been methodically depleting your accounts to fund her secret life." I clenched my fists and tightened my jaw. "What are my possibilities?" Mark reclined in his chair, his face solemn. "With the facts we have, you may make a strong case for Dylan's complete custody and substantial financial support during the divorce procedures, restitution, and possibly even criminal prosecution for misappropriating funds. But there's a chance that she may attempt to portray herself as the victim by claiming emotional distress or another justification, and then Dylan, who may be too little to be affected by a protracted court struggle." I nodded slowly as I realized what was happening, the burden of it all weighing on me. "I don't give a damn about the public scrutiny. I'm only doing this because I care about Dylan," Mark nodded. Taking out a different folder, "I have prepared the preliminary documents for the divorce and custody agreements that we will submit." The next step was to approach her with the proof and observe her reaction. If she fights back, it will escalate. I wasn't angry, nor was I shouting or making accusations, but rather presenting the facts as they are. When she got home that evening, I wanted her to know that this wasn't a negotiation, but rather a reckoning. I skipped the small talk and pleasantries and waited for her again. I gave her the evidence folder as soon as she entered the room. "What is this?" she said, her voice skeptical of everything. "All you've stolen? All you've lied about? All you've betrayed?" I said. She opened the folder and flipped through the pages with shaking hands, and I saw, as she said, "You've committed it. It's all there." Her expression transformed from one of bewilderment and incredulity to one of panic. "Ryan, I can explain. No, You've had months and years to come clean, but you didn't," I interrupted. "Yet you didn't. You told Dylan, myself, and everyone else lies. This is the outcome of your deception, Ryan." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing since I was above pity. "Please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but I love you and—" "Dylan!" she pleaded. I made a sour, hollow sound when I laughed. "Stop living a double life, stealing funds from our accounts to finance your affair. You have deceived me in every manner imaginable. How can you make amends?" She grabbed for my hand, but I firmly repeated, "Don't!" and backed aside. She broke down and sobbed onto her hands, but I was unmoved by her sobs, so I gave her another folder. Containing the divorce documents that you will sign, I stated that you will grant me complete custody of Dylan and that you will consent to monetary compensation. If not, I'll take this to court. Believe me, I've provided more than enough proof to destroy you. You can't take my son away from me. She watched, her voice trembling. The moment you brought Evan into our lives, you put him at risk, I responded icily. You don't deserve him because you used money saved for his future to finance your lies. She simply stared at me for a minute, her face pallid and her breathing irregular, as though she was acknowledging the pointlessness of her position. I nodded, acknowledging the pointlessness of her position, and I felt a rush of relief but didn't allow it to appear positive. Mark will contact your attorney from here. You'll hear from me when it's time to complete the custody agreement once everything has passed through them. She appeared to want to dispute, but instead she sank into a chair, dejected. I apologize, she said in a murmur. For all... I didn't answer. I had a feeling of closure as I exited the room, having nothing further to say. It wasn't the conclusion. Rather, it marked the start of a protracted and challenging process, but for the first time in weeks, I felt in control. My wife's lies had almost ruined me, but I wasn't going to let it happen. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. They no longer defined me. This was my opportunity to rebuild in order to safeguard Dylan and to make sure my wife and Evan Carter couldn't harm us in the future, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. In the days after she signed the divorce papers, the home felt uncomfortably silent. Dylan's laughing could be heard faintly coming from the playroom, a pleasant diversion from the deafening quiet that seemed to permeate every other area of the house. My wife, or perhaps more accurately, ex-wife, who had withdrawn into herself and signed the documents without a battle, but her attitude indicated to me that this wasn't finished in her head. She naturally attempted to speak with reason to revise the tale, but each time she came up to me, I made it plain that there was no turning back. Because of what you have done, Ryan, is it possible for us to speak? She said one evening in a quiet and hesitant voice, wringing her hands at the living room doorway like a kid who has been caught stealing from the cookie jar. I didn't check my book. So please, there's nothing to discuss. I only need you to understand that I insisted on taking a cautious step closer. Realize that you lied to me, as I finally met her eyes and snapped. That you misled us by saying that you took money from your own family to support a relationship with another man. What am I expected to do? To comprehend her tearful gaze, but I didn't experience the typical guilt. Not anymore, she continued, her voice shaking. It wasn't intended to happen this way. I didn't intend to offend you, but you did. And I said, you hurt me, Dylan. Don't stand there and act like you're the only one who made a mistake. You made a number of well-considered decisions. The victim trembled at what I said, but she persisted. I realize I made a mistake. But I love... Don't you dare say you love me, Dylan, I interrupted by holding up a hand. You shouldn't do this to someone you love. And Dylan is fortunate that I'm the one who let you see him. She started crying uncontrollably, but I didn't soften even, though I let you see him. I want to make it right after everything, but I couldn't, she added frantically. Ryan, please tell me how to solve this. The damage is irreparable, I responded icily. You broke that after months of putting yourself first. I can't rely on you to put Dylan first, but I've changed. I shook my head, but she insisted that I've truly recognized how mistaken I was. Doesn't that count for something? Dylan and you might be able to work things out in time, but you can't skip over the consequences simply because you regret them. Her expression dropped, and I saw sincere regret for the first time. She muttered, I thought I could, but I never thought it would go this far. I raised my voice a little bit, and you thought you had both might have a son who loved you, a husband who trusted you, and a partner you thought you could